I'm Monroe Bennett. Last Tuesday, I discovered my husband wasn't just cheating on me, he was helping destroy an entire Dallas neighborhood. For 8 years. I thought Griffin Bennett was simply an ambitious project manager at his family's real estate company. He talked a good game about legacy. About carrying the Bennett name forward. What I didn't know was that his late nights and business dinners weren't about saving the company. They were about making secret promises to a woman named Isabella Cruz, the CEO of a rival construction firm. And the person he thought would hand him the shortcut to power. The betrayal wasn't just in my marriage. It was in the city blueprints. Griffin and Isabella had worked out a scheme to flip a project that was supposed to bring affordable housing to Dallas into a luxury condo deal worth $120 million. The kind of money that turns family loyalty into silence. And silence into complicity. I wasn't supposed to find out. But people like Griffin always leave trails. When I picked up the plans he left on the dining table, I noticed the logo stamped in the corner. Cruz Construction. A rival firm with a reputation for shady bidding and backroom deals. My heart didn't just break as a wife, it burned as a designer who had built her career on creating homes that real families could afford. My husband wasn't only betraying me, he was betraying the very idea of home. And if you think betrayal only ruins marriages, you're wrong. This story unraveled into fraud, greed, and the collapse of an empire. If you've ever wondered what happens when lust collides with real estate power, subscribe. Because this revenge will reach far beyond my front door. The first signs were small enough to ignore if I wanted to stay comfortable. Griffin Bennett started leaving the house in suits that actually fit. Not the off-the-rack jackets he used to grab on sale. He began caring about fabric weights and lapel widths the way a sommelier obsesses over tannins. He swapped his scuffed office shoes for Italian leather and tucked a pocket square into his jacket like a man auditioning for a richer life. The explanation never varied client impressions. Executive presence. The look that gets you in the room. I design buildings for a living. I recognize when someone is trying to redesign themselves. The calendar changed next. Griffin stopped coming home at 6 and started texting polished photos of stakeholder dinners. Always in dining rooms lit like jewelry cases. The captions were vague and heavy with buzzwords. Stakeholder alignment. Capital stack. Incentive zoning. He used to talk about punch lists and permitting windows. Now he spoke in abstractions meant to signal power. He would take a call, smooth his voice, and step into the garage as if drywall could provide privilege. I work with drawings more than words. And drawings rarely lie. One night he left a roll of plans on our dining table. When I cracked the tape and unfurled the sheets, a familiar parcel appeared under the dining room light. The stamp in the corner told a different story. Cruz Construction. The logo sat on every page. Not as a consultant note, but as the contractor of record. That parcel had a city commitment for affordable units. The elevations on those sheets were nothing but glass and privilege. And the setbacks had been massaged to squeeze in more views and more price. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt until the paper started keeping its own score. In his laptop bag, I found a boutique hotel invoice from Uptown. Posted the same night he claimed a site walk in Oak Cliff. The incidentals list read like a celebration. Not a meeting, 2 bar charges. A late dinner. And champagne that would never appear on a punch list. The line between business and personal had not blurred. It had shifted entirely. I called Clara Hayes because Clara does not barter with denial. She listened without interrupting. Then gave me what I needed as a lawyer who has watched developers test the edges for a living. Cruz Construction had a reputation for winning by bending process until it squeaked. Nothing adjudicated. Nothing you could hang in a courtroom. But enough smoke to fog a council chamber. And context has a way of turning suspicion into a map. After that, patterns multiplied. Griffin started name-dropping city officials he used to mispronounce, and suddenly loved restaurants that required valet and whispered menus. He was building a vocabulary for a future he thought he could finance with charm. I tracked times, places, and expenses without confronting him. People lie. Numbers coordinate. When he texted that a consultant had flown in, I checked arrivals and found none. When he sent a photo from a dining room with modern art, I matched the painting to a private room at a steakhouse developer's favor on Thursdays. None of it proved anything by itself. Together, it drew the kind of grid you can lay over a city and see the outline of a scheme. The last confirmation didn't come from a receipt or a drawing. It came from the way his voice changed when he thought I was upstairs. He took a call on speaker in the kitchen and fumbled to switch it off when my footsteps hit the hallway. I paused beyond the corner and heard him lower his tone to a hush I had never heard in our marriage. 5% is secured once the zoning passes, he said. And the silence after those words felt like fresh concrete setting around my ankles. I did not need more signs. I was done pretending now. I needed a plan. Clarity beats anger. I called Clara Hayes and told her I needed a record that would hold up under scrutiny. She did not ask for drama. She asked for dates, amounts, locations, and documents. I started where most schemes fail the calendar. I built a timeline of Griffin Bennett's dinners, site walks, late arrivals, and overnight stays, matching his text to credit card alerts and the boutique hotel invoice from Uptown. Clara created a spreadsheet to reconcile times and payments against public meeting schedules and permitting windows. Patterns that felt personal became patterns that looked prosecutable. Blueprints came next. I scanned the Cruz construction plans he left on our table and compared them to the city's last approved set for the parcel. The differences were not aesthetic flourishes. They were structural extractions. The affordable set-aside vanished from the unit mix, replaced by language about market optimization. Balconias multiplied. Floor plates stretched. And the massing rose just enough to turn a compliance line into a question. I pulled the last city council agenda where the parcel appeared. The minutes showed nothing about a waiver. The public record had not moved. The drawings had. Clara filed public records requests with the planning department for any variance applications or emails referencing the parcel. While those queued, I scraped the city portal for zoning change filings. The application uploaded 2 weeks prior referenced a correction to prior density calculations. The attached PDF included a redlined paragraph that deleted the affordable housing requirement and inserted a placeholder for a community benefit to be defined. Edits were stamped by a junior planner. But the metadata listed a Cruz domain as the last editor before upload. Not illegal on its own, but the kind of footprint that makes investigators lean in. The money trail required more than suspicion. Daniel Brooks provided it. Daniel worked as an analyst in the finance team at Cruz Construction. He contacted Clara through a secure inbox she maintained for corporate fraud tips. His message was brief, professional, and terrified. He attached a folder with internal emails labeled with project codes that matched the parcel number. The thread showed monthly retainer payments flagged as consulting to an entity registered in Nevada 3 months ago. The entity's manager of record used a mailing address that appears on Griffin's travel reimbursements. Clara traced the shell company registration in minutes. It was clean enough to pass a glance and sloppy enough to fail a light. Invoices rounded out the picture. Daniel sent scanned expense sheets categorized as client development. The charges lined up with Griffin's new love for restaurants with locked wine rooms. 2 entries were annotated with initials GC next to a note about post-zoning celebration. The amounts were not extraordinary individually. Together they read like choreography. Dinner at Sue. Privé at bar at Ni. Suite at 1-1. Ride to the airport at 7 the next morning. Each charge carried a date I could pin to a text. Griffin sent me about being passionate for the project. Clara built a binder that did not argue. It demonstrated. The first section mapped dates and expenses to observable events. The second compared approved drawings to Cruz drawings. The third traced the shell company to Griffin's orbit. The fourth printed the zoning application with the red-line deletion of the affordable requirement. The fifth captured Daniel's internal emails with headers intact. So chain of custody was obvious. Clara insisted on preserving every file in original format, including metadata, because speculation can be dismissed, but metadata is stubborn. The hardest moment was seeing the kickback spelled out without the word itself. In one email, a Cruz executive wrote that a 5% consulting allocation would be released once zoning cleared. 5% of a projected fee on a $120 million build is $6 million. Griffin's sentence in my kitchen had not been swagger. It had been accounting. I did not confront him. A confrontation cleans nothing. A clean record saves everything. With the timeline stable, the drawings compared, the shell traced, and the emails preserved, we had what Clara called a narrative of facts. It was no longer a story about a marriage. It was a case about a parcel, a zoning file, and a flow of money designed to erase the homes that should have been built there. I closed the binder and set it on my dining table. The same place, the wrong plans had been unrolled, and decided the next audience would not be Griffin. It would be the city and the press. Revenge begins with choosing the right audience. I asked Clara Hayes to vet a reporter at the Dallas Morning News who understood development, zoning, and the difference between rumor and record. She suggested someone who had broken procurement stories without turning them into spectacle. We met in a quiet corner of a cafe near City Hall. I did not pitch scandal. I offered a binder and a promise that every claim inside it could be verified against public filings and metadata. The reporter listened, asked for sources, and outlined ground rules, off the record for context, on background for process. On the record, once documents cleared legal, that was the only pace I would accept. Clara handled the law while I handled the language. We organized the Cruz file into a sequence that read like a calendar rather than a headline: zoning application edits, plan set swaps, retainer payments, and dinners tied to dates. Nothing theatrical. Nothing subjective. We highlighted the line where the affordable housing requirement quietly disappeared and paired it with the email chain, where a 5% consulting allocation would trigger after zoning. Clara would not let a single page leave our hands without a copy of the original file's metadata. Because credibility is architecture, and architecture rests on load-bearing points. The reporter asked about motive. I avoided the marriage and answered with the parcel. Dallas needs housing at prices real families can reach. The plan on the table erased those units in favor of glass, height, and a view. If the public was going to lose those homes, the public deserved to understand why. The story became a matter of civic interest before it was ever a matter of my home. That was not a pose. It was the only reason the facts mattered. Timing would decide the impact. Bennett Real Estate Holdings scheduled a board meeting for Thursday morning to review the Cruz proposal. Griffin Bennett expected a smooth presentation and a vote. I wanted the truth to arrive before a pen touched paper. The reporter proposed a publication window that would drop the piece at 8 a.m. with a digital alert pushed to subscribers and a social post linking to the documents. Clara coordinated a simultaneous delivery of our packet to the City Council's Planning Committee and to HUD's regional office. We were not ambushing a family. We were notifying regulators and the public at the same time. Protecting Daniel Brooks was non-negotiable. His emails became exhibits only after Clara stripped identifiers and confirmed each document could be independently sourced through parallel paths. For internal notes we could not duplicate in the public record. The paper's legal team required a corroborating witness. Clara produced one from a prior audit that mentioned Cruz Construction's unusual consulting structures. Names were withheld. Dates were precise. Nothing in the article would hinge on a voice. It would hinge on the paper trail. I told no one in the Bennett family. Not even Miles Bennett. Griffin moved through the house with the relief of a man who thinks momentum is proof he is winning. He rehearsed talking points in the mirror about density. tax contributions, and market signals. He straightened his new pocket squares and left lipstick-red reservation cards on the counter. I didn't touch them. I focused on email confirmations from the newsroom, on the docket number stamped at City Hall, and on the courier receipt showing our packet delivered to HUD. Clara insisted we lock one more detail before go time the chain of custody for the plan revisions. She secured an affidavit from a former city contractor attesting to the standard process for uploading zoning documents and how external parties sometimes reach staffers to pre-format language. The affidavit did not accuse, it described. That distinction, she said, would keep the focus where it belonged on the facts of what changed, when it changed, and whose domain edited the file before the public ever saw it. The night before the meeting, I laid the binder back on my dining table and opened to the page where the affordable clause had been erased. I read it once. Not for anger, but to remind myself who would pay the price if we failed. Then I put the binder away, set my phone face down, and slept. At 7:59 the next morning, my phone vibrated with a newsroom confirmation. The story would go live in 1 minute. Exactly 30 minutes before the board convened, with links to every document and a sidebar explaining the affordable housing commitment the parcel had carried until it didn't. I did not need to say a word to Griffin. The city would speak for me. The Bennett Real Estate Holdings boardroom was set with the polish of a closing dinner. Griffin Bennett walked in with the confidence of a man who believed the finish line was already behind him. He wore the navy suit he had recently justified as an investment and carried a leather folio like it contained the next chapter of his career. At his side, Isabella Cruz radiated certainty. She adjusted her blazer, nodded at the board members, and placed her own presentation deck on the table. They looked like partners unveiling progress, not co-conspirators delivering a scheme. The first 10 minutes went as expected. Griffin spoke about maximizing land use, optimizing revenue, and creating what he called a signature skyline. Isabella added points about efficiency, international financing, and her firm's track record of timely completion. They clicked through slides of glass towers rising over Dallas, balconies stacked like currency, and renderings that erased the modest brick homes the parcel had once promised. Board members leaned forward, impressed by the imagery if not by the jargon. Then the room shifted. A vibration passed across the table as phones lit up in unison. One director glanced at his screen, frowned, and then passed his phone quietly to the chair. Another checked an alert and sat back, no longer watching Griffin. The Dallas Morning News had published. The headline stretched across every device: Cruz Construction and Bennett Executive linked to zoning kickback. Affordable housing requirement deleted. Beneath it sat the very drawings I had scanned on my dining table. The emails Daniel Brooks had risked his career to share, and the zoning application metadata, tying a Cruz domain to the edits. The chair of the board cleared his throat. He did not ask for the next slide. He asked Griffin if he had anything to disclose before the meeting continued. Silence took the place of the pitch Griffin had rehearsed. He shuffled papers, glanced at Isabella, and attempted a sentence about misunderstanding. It collapsed before the period. Isabella stood straighter, her lips pressed together, and closed her laptop as though ending a call. She did not argue. She did not explain. She knew the documents spoke louder than she could. By the time City Council released its statement confirming an investigation into zoning irregularities, reporters were already gathering in the lobby. Miles Bennett excused himself from the table to answer a call. And when he returned, his expression had changed from skepticism to alarm. He announced that HUD had received a complaint packet with identical evidence and that regulators were reviewing the parcel. The boardroom was no longer a place of negotiation. It was a triage room for reputation. Griffin tried one last defense, claiming he had pursued the project for the good of the company, that he had been misled by consultants, that his only mistake was enthusiasm. None of it survived the weight of invoices annotated with his initials or the shell company traced to his reimbursements. Isabella slipped out first, moving quickly toward the elevators with her bag clutched tight. Griffin followed minutes later, pale and hollow. Past board members who no longer looked at him as family but as liability. I arrived at the building with Clara Hayes just as the lobby filled with questions and cameras. I did not approach Griffin. I did not need to. The city had already answered every question he could avoid. Standing with Clara at the edge of the crowd, I felt the calm of inevitability. The empire Griffin thought he was helping to expand had been reduced to a headline, a regulatory review, and a stain on his name. My silence had been louder than his words. Fallout moved faster than rumor. By afternoon, Bennett Real Estate Holdings issued a statement suspending Griffin Bennett, pending an internal review and appointing an outside firm to audit every interaction with Cruz Construction. The board placed the parcel on hold and pledged to work with City Council and HUD. Miles Bennett led the press call, his voice even and formal. And for the first time since I joined the family by marriage, he did not speak to me as an accessory to Griffin. He spoke to me as a stakeholder whose documentation kept the company from signing a contract that would have stained its name for a generation. The distance between us narrowed, not into warmth, but into respect. Griffin tried to salvage his position with explanations about confusion and process. Explanations wilt when matched against invoices, shell registrations, and edits stamped with a rival's domain. By the end of the week, his company email was disabled, and his badge no longer opened the garage. He packed his office into bankers' boxes under HR supervision, while security waited by the elevator. That was the last day he wore the navy suit like armor. Titles fall quietly. Consequences do not. Isabella Cruz faced a different audience. Shareholders filed a demand for records. A lender paused a credit facility. The board of Cruz Construction placed her on leave, while it retained counsel to respond to the Dallas Morning News story and the inquiries that followed. For a CEO who built her image on certainty, the silence around her name became its own kind of headline. The market does not care about charisma when the numbers suggest risk. The investigation unfolded in layers. City Council requested staff memos and access logs for the zoning portal. HUD asked for a complete timeline, including drafts. The reporter followed with a second piece explaining how a single red line can erase affordable units from a city plan if no one is watching. I read it without triumph. I read it like a post-mortem for a neighborhood that almost lost its chance at fairness. Clara Hayes and I finalized the divorce filings with the same restraint we brought to the binder. No theatrics. No bargaining for sentiment. The settlement accounted for Griffin's removal from the payroll and the legal expenses he had incurred, trying to outrun documents that did not blink. We divided property like adults. And I kept the house long enough to decide whether it still felt like a place to live rather than a storage unit for a former life. Some rooms are easier to reclaim than others. In the weeks that followed, the city asked me to consult on a revised plan for the parcel. It was not a favor and it was not pity. It was a professional request to help design a project that honored the original affordable commitment and blended dignity with density. I agreed because that was the point of the fight. We convened listening sessions with nearby residents who had been bracing for displacement and brought in an economist to model rents families could carry without surrendering their futures. The drawings that emerged were not glamorous. They were honest. Inside Bennett Real Estate Holdings, reforms reached beyond statements. Miles Bennett announced a permanent policy wall between vendor selection and any executive with personal ties to bidders. The company adopted a public tracker for community benefits attached to each development and brought in independent compliance counsel to monitor zoning submissions. Miles asked me to serve as an external design consultant on their mixed-income projects. I accepted under one condition: every affordable unit promised on paper would be delivered in concrete and light. Griffin called once to apologize without asking for forgiveness. I listened and said nothing. Because silence sometimes keeps truth from being negotiated down to something more convenient. He moved to a rented apartment, and learned how quiet a room can be when reputation is still catching up to it. I did not follow the rest of his story. I had a neighborhood to design. Catharsis did not arrive as gloating. It arrived as a ribbon of afternoon sun cutting across a new plan sheet, the kind that makes a room feel possible. It arrived when a resident at a community meeting asked whether her mother could afford to live in the building, and I could answer yes, with math instead of hope. It arrived when the reporter's final piece quoted the new unit mix like a balance restored. No one walked away untouched. Griffin lost his job and his marriage. Isabella lost the certainty that power could outrun records. Bennett Holdings faced its reflection and chose to alter it. And I stood exactly where I started. In a city I love. With the work in my hands and my name unshaken. Justice, in the end, was not a scene. It was a standard. Griffin Bennett thought he was building a luxury empire. What he built was his own collapse. In the span of a week, his marriage ended. His career vanished. And his family name turned from asset to liability. Isabella Cruz believed she could convert zoning laws into profit. But the paper trail caught her faster than charm ever could. And Bennett Real Estate Holdings, faced with public evidence, had no choice but to rebuild its reputation on different terms. As for me, I chose not to carry bitterness. I carried proof. Proof that lies leave trails. That greed erases itself. And that silence timed correctly can speak louder than shouting. My revenge was never about spectacle. It was about making sure truth showed up in the right room. At the right time. With no way out. If you want more stories where betrayal collapses into justice, subscribe to Revenge Ties. Because every empire built on lies eventually crumbles.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.